understanding, like if the United States government was more honest with their people, I believe that a good 80% of us would support it anyway, if that makes sense.
I think that was certainly true after Pearl Harbor. You know, you
Yes.
had you,
Awesome. So today I have with me author Gerald Everett Jones. And Gerald, you've written a few books, like 15 novels. Is that
that's
correct?
right. That's 15 novels and then any number of business technical books that are probably at the bottom of the sea someplace.
Man, so you actually started with nonfiction, is that right?
Yes, I did business and technical books for some number of years, and I even had a major big agent for that. They had done the Dummies books and Chicken
Oh,
Soup for the
yeah.
Soul books, and then as I tell the story, when I told them I wanted to focus on fiction later in my career, they said, "Have a nice life, kid." And that's how I got into self-publishing. And I was actually an early adopter of print on demand. And that was before there was a Kindle. That was before there were ebooks. There were actually the outfit for print on demand got bought by, I believe it was iUniverse. And I was one of those early authors with them. And then I became more like an indie publisher, and I have my own imprint, La Puerta Books and Media. So I put out um, paperbacks and hardcovers and ebooks, EPUB and Kindle, and audiobooks. So got the bases covered there.
Man. So your latest book is I think it's Preacher Finds a Corpse, right?
Well, Jonathan's Journal is the latest one. Now, can you?
No
Preacher
worries,
Finds a
man.
Corpse is the fourth book in the Preacher Evan Wycliffe series, which is a series of mystery thrillers. I'm very proud of that. And that is about the the main character, the reluctant sleuth, if you will, is an agnostic Baptist minister in southern Missouri, which is kind of, that's my background, if you will. I'm these days I'm more of a, oh, I don't know, cosmic spiritualist or something.
I'm with you. I'm with you. Same here. I'm not very religious at all. I mean, I believe, but I'm very very spiritual, and I've had my own
Yes,
fair share
absolutely.
of mystic experiences and stuff. So I totally get it, man. So is Jonathan's journal been released yet?
Not until April the 14th.
And so that's what I wanted. I want to talk about Jonathan's journal real quick because it's set during World War I. Is that
Yes.
accurate? And
Yes.
so I had watched another interview with you and another person, and you had mentioned that you hadn't learned about you knew things about World War I, but they weren't they didn't teach you in school that World War I really was a global war.
Right. And the
And
textbook answers that they taught me in school about why it got going or why we went to war. And I'd say that that resonates with today is no matter what the war was, as the general public, if you will, the voting citizenry, you're not going to get the real reasons. And that
right.
has to do with the realities of geopolitics. I actually was on a conference call with some of my schoolmates from years ago the other day, and they reminded me what actually we'd been told then was that President Roosevelt actually kind of let us get attacked. He really did know that that was coming, and he felt as though that would give us a reason to get in the war on Churchill's side. He had been talking with Churchill very closely, and they had agreed that they had common interests. You know, the old saying of, here we have a common language separated by an ocean or something like that.
Yeah.
I forgot what the saying was, but no, but Churchill had Roosevelt had been supporting Churchill as much as he possibly could with what he called the Lend-Lease program. We were taking old
Yes.
battleships and basically letting them have it for $1 or whatever it was. But but the lessons of World War One, the core of this book is actually a real diary, a real soldier's diary from 1919, a British soldier. And the way the story goes, and this is the true part of the story, is it was in my mother's collectibles that actually I did not open until she had passed away. And she had lived in London for a while. Both my folks did, and she loved to go to Portobello Road, the flea market, and she just she was into collectibles, including like horse buckles, which is like a complete other. They're made of brass. They look like bottle openers. No, it's a different subject. Okay, but she had this red leather bound book that was written in this elegant India ink cursive. And in some ways it was kind of unreadable and it was full of like clippings and stuff
Right.
and I just wasn't it's like I didn't feel any connection to it. And so I had it among her inheritance, but it just wasn't something that engaged me until I decided, something, I'll just send this to a typist and have it transcribed. So I'll
Yeah.
have it transcribed into something I can read and it'll be searchable and whatever. Because I mean, there's there's still, TypeScript. Yes, you can read it now these days, and make it into a file. But I had this transcribed, and I got into it, and the more I got into it, the more it was like, wait a minute, this guy, when he signed up for the war at the beginning of the war, yes, he did eventually get sent to the Western Front in France, but by the time he was injured, he reenlisted. By the time he got into the war, he had missed most of the war in Europe.
Yeah.
And so then the Brits, rather than letting him just retire at home, they sent him to Mesopotamia, which I didn't realize was today Iraq, and um, it was Baghdad and Basra and Mosul, I believe, that became a country later. But that was a place where the Brits were fighting the Turks at the time, and the
Yes.
Turks were allied with the Germans for reasons I didn't understand. And then, after he had actually fought in southern Iraq, he was sent to India. And that was in the late in the war, even after the armistice. And then he was sent back to Turkey to kind of supervise the camps of the refugees and all this kind of stuff. So it turned out, and this is only something that I found out from the research, what I really feel as though, and I think at the time, people who were alive at the time might have appreciated this, is that the real cause, what I felt was the real cause of World War One, was the Berlin-Baghdad Railway. Now, did you ever hear of that?
No, no,
Okay.
I have not. But
Well,
I
here's
do,
the thing.
I did understand like the complexities and intricacies that was World War One, and which World War Two is just basically a continuation of World War One.
Well,
And now
yes,
now we're
absolutely.
sitting here staring at World War Three, which is basically a
Well,
continuation of
and
World War
and it
Two.
turns out that Putin's reasons for invading crime, especially the Crimea, have a lot to do with what I had found out. This is
Really?
still going on. Yes, this is still going on, and it may take a bit to assemble the puzzle pieces, but it begins really with the Suez Canal, 1879, is it?
Yeah.
The French were building it, and they were almost done with it, but the problem was they had been attacked by Prussia, by Otto von Bismarck, and they nearly lost that war, the Franco-Prussian War. They were surrounded by Prussian troops, and they nearly destroyed Paris. I mean, they were artillery shells into Paris on a daily basis, and the people of Paris, and the siege almost worked. the people of Paris were starving. They were down to eating rats and spoiled vegetables and whatever they could find, and the Aristo restaurants were still open, and they ended up butchering the pair of elephants in the zoo,
Wow.
Castor and Pollux, and then the residents, the patrons complained, "Oh, it was too tough. It was too racy." Anyhow, um, but what happened with that war, and so we're talking about when, into the early 1880s, 1970s into 1870s into early 1880s. And the only reason that that war wound down was that Kaiser Bill, Wilhelm II, just kind of got tired of waiting out the French to surrender. He didn't really want to destroy this city that he would love to own, which of course in World War II, the Germans thought they actually owned Paris. Um, but he basically withdrew. He took his troops home. And so that gave the French a chance to rebuild, which they did very rapidly with some American investment. But about the time that they began to recover, they still had the Suez Canal project going on, but they ran out of money. And so there's this, actually, it's an old silent movie that became one of the first talkies that you can watch, and you'll see it all explained. Is the movie's called Disraeli, and it was about Benjamin Disraeli, the Prime Minister of Britain, in the in the late 1870s, and he realized how strategic the Suez Canal would be. And he went to the Bank of England and he said, loan me $5,000 because they didn't have that much extra in the kitty at the time. Loan me $5,000 and there's the Pasha of Egypt. He owns half of it or some such thing. He says, I'll get him to agree to give us his stake in the Suez Canal for 5 million. And they did. Okay.
That's awesome.
Now, meanwhile, Britain kind of felt like, they had been in India since Queen Elizabeth the first time. The British East India Company was doing a brisk business, as were the Indonesians with that. But the idea that they didn't have to sail around Africa anymore, they're like, wow, and the bankers were up for it. And then, so then about the same time, 1870s, the Germany, Austria, Hungary, all that alliance, when they started to call them after they united after Prussia, and now this is thing called Germany, still under Kaiser Wilhelm. They had announced that they're going to build the Berlin-Baghdad Railway. Now, what that was going to actually do was it was going to link the port of Hamburg in the north, very big, active port on the North Sea. That was going to create a railroad line between that port and the Persian Gulf.
Wow. That would have been amazing.
That would have been amazing, and it almost got done. And the thing was, at the time, the British investors, the private investors, the same people who bailed out the French in the Suez, go, how can we get into that? That's looking pretty good. That's like today, and how can we get into a piece of crypto? Okay.
Right.
But the thing was, in the British Navy starts doing the math, and they go, wait a minute, what's the route? Okay, well then they go, wait a minute, that's going to go far enough inland, and that's going to be outside the range of our gunboats.
Right.
So guess what? These guys are going to bypass the Suez Canal. We can't let that happen.
Exactly.
Okay, the two reasons we were taught in school for the beginning of World War One, and we really didn't understand. These were just answers on the multiple choice test. One reason, interlocking directorates. Mutual treaties between all these royal families of Europe is like, okay, if we get attacked, you defend us. If you get attacked, we defend you. So, okay. So then this assassination of Archduke Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary, he was heir to the throne. and so would have been the next ruler. The fact that now we can appreciate the idea this, and this was a Serbian student who wanted independence for Serbia. Now we can appreciate why the Serbians might have been upset by Germany carving up their country to run this major railroad road right through it. And they were going to be taken up, grabbing farmland. And it's like, well, maybe they don't have eminent domain, or maybe they're just going to tell us, it's like, remember the cattle wars
Yeah.
in the U.S. West. It's like, okay, the farmers wanted fences and railroads, and the cattle people only wanted railroads to the extent that they were going to take their beef to market.
Right.
Okay, so you had that at the beginning of World War One, and and then also the fact that the British had already, because by the time World War One had started, or the British already had sailed through the Suez Canal and taken control of the area around Basra in the south. So basically, the British felt like they already owned half of Mesopotamia and Palestine.
Right.
So they had occupation troops in Palestine, and they're trying to keep the um, they're basically trying to keep the Jewish settlers away from the Arab indigenous people, and
Right.
and it turned out, I mean, if you watch that, what was a Netflix series about uh, the Queen of the Queen of Jerusalem, was it? The Princess of Jerusalem? But I mean, it really does tell the story about how, a Jewish trader who was in import export, he had a store, and he would go make periodic trips into Beirut in Lebanon, where the port was, where his best friends and business partners were Arab, Lebanese Arab traders, and these were
Right.
the rich guys of Lebanon were helping the the Jewish traders of Israel, who were rapidly it wasn't Israel yet, Palestine, helping them build their businesses, and this was like, it was starting to look like a country. So the British were upset about that, and then so this is the thing that I really, had discovered, was that this fellow, he really, when he was dispatched to Mesopotamia, I don't think he really expected that he was going to see much action.
Yeah.
And I think also one of the reasons he enlisted was that he kind of thought he was going to be a world tourist on the on the shilling of the king. Okay,
Yeah.
he'd always wanted to see India, and so but this diary is like a field report. It's like, I
Right.
went here, I went there, I ate this, we, now we were really in trouble, and we were starting to eat the meals, and I mean, there was a lot of privation there, a lot of, mosquitoes and heat, but also swamps, and then it was cold, and I mean, he's just given a field report of, I went here, I went there. And so the inspiration for the novel was, as I got into it, I thought, well, let me take a fictional character in the present, and okay, I'm not a professor, but I could play one on TV. What if I make my main character? What do I know about? I know a lot about late 19th century art history. So I'll make him a professor of art history. Okay. And so he finds his mother's diary after and the thing is, she's lived with him the last years of his life, she's lived with him during COVID. So it's been locked down, and they were driving each other nuts. Okay, but he felt an obligation because he's an only child, and his father had died years and years ago. His father had been British. His mother actually had been. She was an American, but she was a stockbroker in England, and she was kind of they called him a gentleman's woman. And back in the day, a gentleman's woman was basically, she was a her account was a rich British guy who had a big portfolio and was kind of always horny. So basically, she was a trophy wife. So I mean, she has Jonathan, you know, late in life for her, she's in her early 30s, but I mean, he's in his 60s at that time. Now, and then, his and he's going to public school in Britain and Torquay, and he's being teased. Oh, well, your mom must have slept around because, your dad was like an old fart. And when he would go home and back in the day and he would say, Mom, they're saying that, dad's not my dad. She said, you have to remind them that Cary Grant had Jennifer when he was 62. Because it turned out that she was a fan of old movies, but the, the thing that she really loved about old movies was the dresses. So she
Yeah.
could, and one of my true relatives was a dress designer for Zsa Zsa and Celeste Holm and some of those. And so I know something of that history as well. So that I made that kind of like her other hobby, besides collecting, horse brass. She knew who designed, she knew Ori Kelly designed for Betty Davis, and her personality in the book. I gave her the Betty kind of a Betty Davis personality. It's like living with her was not easy, but
Right.
also my so this is not a thinly veiled depiction of my mother because my mother was more like more like Grace Kelly and well, I mean, she was probably temperamental
Yes.
too, but but no, a better example is Olivia de Havilland. So,
Okay.
in Jezebel, Betty Davis and Olivia Havilland are playing opposite each other, and
Right.
Betty or and Betty Davis is Jezebel, and she's just basically hell on wheels, and Olivia Havilland is what in screenwriting we call an opponent ally.
Right.
Okay, this is somebody who will debate her, disagree with her, and yet end up backing her up no matter what she decides. That's
Yes. Yes.
that and this reminds me of a little off the track, but screenwriting 101, William Goldman gave us the advice is you actually need three main characters. You need the main character is going to be like, and he used the example, Steve McQueen.
Yeah.
Okay, Steve McQueen doesn't like a lot of dialogue. He doesn't want to be telling you the plans for the bank robbery.
Right.
Okay, the opponent ally, McQueen's at the beginning of the scene. McQueen's going to say, "Okay, lay out the plans. Tell us what we're going to do." Okay, so the other members of the gang are listening, and opponent ally going, at 9 o'clock we hit the bank, and the chase car comes up, and we've got so the opponent ally, the ally is giving the plan, and yet McQueen may be going engaging the plan like, I don't like that part. So that's the opponent part.
Right.
Okay, but when you finally get down to it, McQueen wants to say, "By God, let's do it." Okay, that's the line. That's the only line that the audience is going to remember, and the
Right.
audience is not going to remember what he said. Going to remember the emotion behind the
Exactly.
line because movies are about emotion. Now, what do you think the third guy's for?
Um, let's see. You got the protagonist, the antagonist. Um, I would have to say for comic relief, but
His
what
job is to get eaten or get shot dead.
so I was close. I was
Yeah, yeah,
close.
yeah. No, I'm not saying that character is not also given comic relief.
Right.
I think your hammerhead a glancing blow on the nail. Let's put it that way. So yeah, yeah, yeah. So, but this storytelling, and I digress. But this is really the engine of the book,
Right.
and between the lines, Jonathan, as the professor digging into the book, the fascination of the story is not so much the diary, but it's reading between the lines of the diary and trying to imagine what really happened to him.
Yeah, the story behind the story. I
The story
love
behind
books like
because
that.
and this is the lesson of history. Okay,
Yes.
you're going to get this dry textbook thing about this happened, this happened, this happened. But
Right.
what was Churchill saying to his wife in between these battles? Okay, what was keeping him up at night? Now, maybe we know some of this from his friend's biography, his opponent ally's biography. Okay, but yeah, I that was the adventure for me, was imagining that. So it was like, okay, what would be this guy? I mean, this guy left Exeter, England, and we find out along the way that he was married when he left. How come he signed up for a 3-year tour? Okay, and he was wounded and he came back. He re-enlisted. What the heck? What was going on at the time? What was she sleeping with somebody else and he already knew? Or what, was she just somebody that he'd married so that he could like get a job with her father's business? Or you mean what was the story here? So
I think some back then, I think guys, and of course women too, but I think it was awfully prevalent among younger men. The sense of adventure is a powerful thing.
well, yeah, and especially see since basically what you've got at the time is radio was barely getting started.
Right.
And you and people really didn't see the movies were novelties at the time. You're not
Right.
going to see Steven Spielberg's World War One movie that's going to show you barbed wire and bodies being blown apart, and or even All Quiet on
Right.
the Western
Right.
Front, or and even the older movies did the Thin Red Line, and tried to show us the brutality of war. And I would say that is a virtue of violent war movies, is they show us the price that
Absolutely.
the people paid. And certainly, we had all kinds of World War II movies, and mostly heroic, but not always. I mean, some of the World War One movies are not really. It was kind of like the war to end all wars. I mean,
Yeah.
that was the hope at the time. And one of the reasons about the Suez Canal had to do with what the people in the reading the newspapers back then, and it was on everybody's lips. We never hear about it now. And that's the other thing that I bet you never heard of, the Eastern Question.
No. So I think I might have an idea, but go ahead.
The Eastern Question was, which the British were worried about, which the Germans and the Austrians were worried about, and the Russians were lusting after, was who's going to take over the Turkish Empire after the Ottomans fall.
That's interesting. That's
And
interesting.
and what do the Turks kind of control that the Russians would lust over, covet? The Black Sea.
Yeah. Yeah. And
And
that's actually, yes, it's yes. The Black Sea
one
is right now what they're going after currently.
exactly. And one of and this and my seventh grade world history teacher, he said, if you only remember one thing from this course, he said, here, Russia will always covet warm water ports.
Absolutely. Yes.
Okay. So Afghanistan. Why were we in the Russian troops went into Afghanistan. Their defeat by the Taliban and Osama and all that nonsense. What did they lose? 400,000 soldiers in Afghanistan? Okay, why were
Something
they in
close to that. Yeah.
Afghanistan? Why did they lust after Afghanistan? Well, the rumor was, which was something that nobody told us on TV, they wanted to build a pipeline between the Caspian Sea and the Indian Ocean. Pump,
Really?
pump crude oil or refined gasoline or whatever down to the Indian Ocean so they could sell it to the Chinese. Okay. All right. Well, after they kind of gave up and went home, like gave up after the Prussian War, it's not like they might not have won if they just stayed, but it was like draining their wealth. And perestroika, all that had to do with We don't have refrigerators. You promised us refrigerators and cars, and we're not getting them. Okay, decline of the Soviet Union. So after they were gone, how come we got back in there? Well, if Russia was going to have a pipeline to the sea, how about we just control it?
Right.
And there was, and again, also a rumor, but if you recall, when we were going after bin Laden, one of the things that Cheney really wanted was to drop the bunker buster bomb on the caves that he was running through. Well, it was Gore Vidal who pointed out that if you draw a dotted line between all the caves that we're bombing,
Yeah.
we just we just we just basically dug the route of the Caspian pipeline.
That's that's amazing.
Well, all right,
That's connecting dots, but it's amazing.
well, Ricky, here's the one that, this is the reason for the relevance of Jonathan's journal, is that this is the one that'll curl what's left of your hair. And I did not make this up, and I did not learn this because I was cleared for secrets. This is public information that I read in a book about Russian submarine warfare. And it turns out that, and again, you're not going to hear this on CNN. You're not going to hear this on Fox. You're not going to hear this on MS Now. I don't know why, but Russia has two major submarine bases, nuclear submarine bases that are in more or less warm ports that don't freeze over permanently. Okay.
Right.
They got plenty in the Baltic, but good luck. There's one in Vladivostok on the Sea of Japan. Okay. Access to the Pacific, control the South China Sea. Okay. Potential access to, if they want to lob something at San Francisco, Los
Yep.
Angeles, San Diego. Okay. Vladivostok. The other one, I'm glad you're sitting down, is at the tip of the Crimea in Sevastopol.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let's
I do actually have goosebumps, by the way, just to let
let,
you know.
let's connect some more dots. And that is when Ukraine, after the Soviet Union broke up and Ukraine's a separate country, they had a autonomous government, but it was a puppet government.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
the Russians controlled it, and that meant and really the Russians, what at the time of Stalin just coveted all the corn and wheat that they could grow in the Ukraine, and they ended up starving people because they were shipping all the grain after the revolution. They were shipping all the grain to Moscow to feed the soldiers and the aristos, and there were people who just died by the horde. Just in Ukraine had just such a sad history. But the thing is, what Putin really coveted in later years was the access to the pipeline that he was going to build all the way through Ukraine to get to Germany so he could sell them natural gas.
Yes.
Okay, so, and he had a puppet government that was basically not only going to let him do that, but also forbid Ukraine from competing in the natural gas market so that the Russian gas would be a monopoly with Germany. Okay.
Well, and now you look at what's going on. We have our LNG going over there.
Well, but see, the other side of that, it was like, okay, this Sevastopol question is not so much about natural gas. It's about the fact that once there was the Zelensky government and they tossed the bad guys out. Okay, what was left was an indigenous populist government that basically not only wanted independence for Ukraine, but wanted citizenship in the or alliance with the EU so that American investment dollars could come in and buy their bonds so that it would retire their huge amount of national debt. And Wall Street and Goldman Sachs would have done that.
Yes.
Okay. But Putin didn't want to allow that. And also, the other thing, and this is the big bottom line, is that when Ukraine broke away from the Soviet Union, they voluntarily gave, well, I don't know, voluntarily, I don't know who twisted their arm, but because they wanted to join NATO, they basically gave up their nuclear arsenal.
Yep. And then the
Okay.
Budapest Memorandum was signed, and which is why actually, like, we have justification to be there right now, is because we swore that we'd defend them at that time.
Well, and so if we're going to fast forward to if Putin hadn't invaded, okay, so Ukraine is I mean, Ukraine's a really vital independent economy. I mean, even as much devastation as they've had, I mean, lots of software development, lots of very sophisticated
And
uh,
food. And food.
and very active infrastructure. And I mean, of
Yeah.
course, nuclear, other story. But
The
the thing
world's
is,
largest nuclear power plant in Europe is
absolutely.
in Ukraine.
Absolutely. And this is why the Russians went after it. But the thing is that with the Zelensky government and with that government being more or less autonomous from Russia and not friendly to Russia, if they were to petition NATO for membership, if at that meeting, if you were a fly on the wall, what would you be likely to hear?
Yeah.
Well, we would really welcome you into the family of European nations. I mean, that's really it's preventing the advance of call it communism, call it Russian autocracy, call it whatever you want, has always been a foreign policy goal of the United States. But why don't you just give up that sub base and kick those guys out?
Yes.
Um,
And we're
uh,
touching on something a little bit for me is a little bit unnerving of why why global powers feel like they have to lie to their populace still. I think with the current conflict right now, the we're constantly being lied to, constantly. Even when we're told the truth, it's spun into lies, and I have a hard time understanding, like, if the United States government was more honest with their people, I believe that a good 80% of us would support it anyway, if that makes sense.
I think that was certainly true after Pearl Harbor. You
Yes.
had and actually it was like I heard the statistic the other day. The so-called privileged kids of Harvard who back then Harvard didn't really have open enrollment. It was, if your father had given,
Right.
donated a building stuff like that. Okay, if your grandfather's name is on a building, you're probably gonna, get in. Um, it was something like 90% of the undergraduate enrollment of Harvard actually enlisted
Wow.
after Pearl Harbor. Now, this is late in the war. Now,
Wow.
now, I mean, you begin to look at history and it's okay, yes, the origins of World War II had an awful lot to do with what happened in Germany and the Weimar Republic. The Weimar Republic was a hugely progressive, very sophisticated, very looked a lot like today's pinkas, if you will, and very, to use modern language, LGBTQ tolerant, um, highly educated. And the problem with those progressives was they were arguing with them because they love debate. They love
Yes.
open society. They love multiple opinions. They spent so much time arguing themselves that the conservatives with Hitler got in with 30% of the vote.
Right. Yes.
Okay. Now, I mean, we don't need to go too far to understand why our current leader did study Mein Kampf and Goebbels' techniques, and any lie that's repeated more than three times is fact and all that. I mean, yes, we have a government that is at the present day in the habit of lying daily and in the extreme, because Roy Cohn was the mentor of the current leader, and he had been attorney to the New York Mafia and also to Roger Stone and Paul Manafort. And basically, his first rule was never admit anything,
Right.
no matter what you're, I mean, and so, and this is a courtroom strategy, okay? You go into court and it's like, no, I was someplace else at the time, and here's my friend to tell you, he and I were sharing a
Exactly.
beer, all that. But Roy, and who was Roy Cohn also chief strategist for was McCarthy, and the Joseph McCarthy and the anti-communist campaign in the early 50s, and who was McCarthy's protege, Richard Nixon.
Yes.
And who was the inventor of um, and not just Nixon personally, but the people who were behind him, who was the inventor of dirty tricks in the 1960s, was the Republicans in the 1960s, who began to realize that, political double dirty dealing. Now, that's not to say that the Dixiecrats and some of the people who came before were had white gloves, but basically the agenda of that party, since that time has been cut them off at the knees before, deny it before you get accused of it and blame them. I mean, this is something that we get, just constantly. So, and then if you're to listen to Rachel Maddow's podcast, which is really all about history, it's not propaganda. She said, okay, McCarthy was basically a pro-fascist, pro-Hitlerian member of the U.S. Congress before he became the anti-communist. The reason for the anti-communist has to do with preparing the ground for the fascists, a la Lindbergh, who supported the fascists, Henry Ford, who supported the fascists, all the people who, and in fact, the British king who stepped down because he was a pro-fascist and would have made peace with Hitler because he, um, if you had been the King of England and the Prime Minister of England, like, Neville Chamberlain was his Prime Minister, if in the early days of World War II, you had been given a choice, are you going to enter into another war that's going to be just like the war to end all wars and just as bloody, or make peace with these guys and see if you can't work it out,
Right.
even though we know that they are blackguards?
Right.
Okay, even then, now, yes, we've got that. We've got the man in the black tower, uh, as was it Philip K. Dick, or I don't remember.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, to give us an alternative history to what would have happened, and also, um, it was it was Philip Roth who wrote the book about the American Nazi president, but his book had a lot more to do with how that would have affected the Jews of his hometown in New Jersey. It didn't really. I mean, yes, I mean that was also a dark, chilling alternative history
Well,
as
I mean, I
well.
think for thousands of years, there's actually been an East versus West for thousands of years. And what East versus West is so they call us the West, or we call ourselves the West because we are the most Western Christian civilization that hasn't been ended yet.
Going back
And
to Emperor Constantine and
so
the
now
division of the Roman Empire.
we've got the rise of Christian nationalism, right? I mean,
Oh,
I I have not heard this much anti-Semitism ever in my life, ever. And it's I don't know where we're going with it, if that makes sense. Like I see the current extreme right being used as tools
yes, absolutely.
to
Yes.
shut down the extreme left. And I don't know
And
where
it
we're
is,
going with it.
and it is a tool. I mean, the origins of some of the recent roots, and you call it recent within the last couple of centuries, of anti-Semitism is Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which is basically a propaganda manual that the The not before the Nazis, the French anti-Semitists used it at the time of um, uh, the what was the racist trial? Um, the French army officer that got basically sentenced because he was for reasons of anti-Semitism. They blamed him.
I don't know
They
this
blamed
one.
everything. This is the Dreyfus
Okay.
affair, and that we're talking about 1870s, 1880s France. Okay, when they had just came off a populist revolution, is that at the end of that period of strife, when the Prussians had kind of left, um, there was a pro-communist kind of movement in France called the Commune, which
Right.
was basically about instilling order with an autocratic, you know, they were still eating rats in Paris, and it's like, okay, we're just basically going to make the trains run on time, and it was just, it was a lot like the Hitlerian takeover of Germany. We're going to restore order. Okay, well, the communists got kicked out by the by the royalists. Okay, and the royalists were fascists, and the royalists were the ones who persecuted Dreyfus and blamed him, and he was a Jew, and they blamed him for all the pro-communist and all the whatever back then. And fast forward to World War II, and we're hopping around a lot, but fast forward to World War II, half of my family were Swiss German who fled uh, um, Switzerland, the German part of Switzerland, in the 1870s because they were afraid Kaiser Wilhelm would draft them. They were not Jewish. They were rebellious Protestants. They weren't German Catholic.
Okay.
So as non-Germans, as non-Catholics, who's going to be sent across? Who's going to be commanded out of the trenches first?
Right.
Okay. Now I also have Germans on my father's side who, and my dad volunteered for the U.S. Navy in 19, was it 43, 44, but he went to officer candidate school, and he got in late in the war, and he was the lieutenant junior grade engineering officer on a troop ship. So they call them LSTs, large slow targets. So they're full of thousands of soldiers and a bunch of tanks. So they're going to go across the Pacific. They're going to go to Guadalcanal, Okinawa, and they're going to drop the door, let everybody out, and then they're going to turn on and go home. But guess what? On the way out, they had a destroyer escort. Okay. On the way back, it was like, our fighter planes are needed someplace else.
Right.
So large slow target. So that was the time. Okay, but the thing that he confided to me was he said, your mother, my mother. He said he was talking about his mother, second generation German. Uh, she, he said she was an admirer of Hitler until they found out about the camps.
Right.
They didn't find out about the camps until 1944, until the beginning of the liberation of the camps by the Russians and the Americans. And so, yes, it was all about bailing the Weimar Republic out of its debt and making the trains run on time, giving, people had jobs and, manufacturing war material and whatever all. And yeah, I mean, um, and there was that. I don't, I knew my grandmother as a Sunday school teacher, as a devout lady, a strict Southern Baptist, but I don't really know what her attitude toward Jews was because I lived in Kansas City. I never met a Jew until we moved to
That's where I'm
Chicago.
at, is Kansas City. I
I
so
I I was raised in Independence, Harry Truman's hometown, and yeah, I mean,
actually, so
there's that
since you're
whole
familiar with
racism,
the area, I can tell you, I'm actually not in Kansas City. I'm in St. Joe.
and
So that I've born and
my
raised here my whole life.
my father's family, the Joneses, really Welsh, settled in New Cambria, up your way. And New
Right.
Cambria means New Wales, and they were farmers, as my mother's family, the Swiss Germans, went to southern Missouri, and they were Appleton City and Butler and Springfield and that area. So yeah, that's where my heritage is for sure. But but no, I mean, and Harry Truman, God love him, and the buck stops here, and a guy that probably had a lot of trouble telling a lie. It was the crooked Pendergast machine in Kansas City who I mean financed his campaign as a judge. He'd been a haberdasher in a clothing hop, financed his campaign as a judge, and then pushed him into the U.S. Senate, and then
Yep. And
from
the rest is history, right?
and the rest is history. And uh, he he did a lot of he did a lot of good stuff. Okay.
Right.
And I mean, he had just it came out the other day again where it was saying he had an anti-corruption investigation all through the end of the war where, he was trying to root out government contractors that were like, bilking and, paying their
That's same thing we're
bribes on the
going through
side.
right now.
And actually at the time, Eisenhower, as the Allied commander for Europe, was actually against what Truman was doing because he was afraid that it was going to chill the activities of the war material manufacturers. It was only when he became president and he started becoming more familiar with the military industrial complex that he decided, something, Harry, that was a really good idea. But back to racism, when I was in school, Independence Junior High School, William Chrisman, and Harry was retired at that point. He was living in Independence, and my school bus would pass Harry's house every day. And I had read in the papers that that's when they gave Martin Luther King the Nobel Prize.
Yeah.
And reportedly, there were journalists who rushed up to Harry's doorstep, as they would often do. And Harry was coming out for his morning walk, as he did. And they said, they just gave Martin Luther King the Nobel Prize. What do you think of that? And he said, I didn't give it to him.
That's funny.
He and J. Edgar Hoover were on the same page about that. It's like, okay,
Right.
there's this fear that, I mean, why did the Black Panthers get persecuted? Is because, we don't want those people carrying machine guns. And, we now we're calling them Antifa. And, has anybody, I mean, I certainly know some people that I would call white nationalists. I certainly know plenty of evangelicals, and I know some Catholics that probably would be very sympathetic with Opus Dei and really what you might call hostile toward the current progressive pope.
Yeah.
Okay, I know a lot of those people. Never met anybody who called themselves Antifa. You
Right.
know,
Right.
I
Yeah.
mean,
It's
I
an
don't,
idea.
I
It's an idea. And that's when they designated when they designated Antifa as a
terrorist
terrorist
organization. Yes.
organization, I was like, that doesn't make sense. Like, how are they going to prosecute that? Like, and I think maybe that's the point, is to get us used to having these political labels so that they can prosecute us. And
Well, I mean,
I'm not affiliated with Antifa, and as a matter of fact, I'm actually pretty conservative in today's political climate. But I used to be like what I would consider like a center leftist, if you will. But the left has moved so far left, the right has moved so far right.
yes.
I feel politically homeless, if
the
that makes
dia
sense.
the dialogue has stopped.
Yes,
And
yes,
and this is one of the things that really, I guess you'd say, concerns me. To say that it angers me is like I don't want to waste that much emotion. But there's
exactly. Yes,
something that really concerns me is the direction of education in this country. and how different it is. It seems to be, because I'm not a parent. I mean, I don't have school age kids now, but I I believe that the curriculum and the approach to education has gone so far. I mean, I would be a firm advocate of STEM. Okay, I
Yes,
really, yes, and poor Mashio Kaku said, please don't change immigration policy because every one of those kids is going to have to drop out of my PhD program. They were all either Indian or Chinese.
I love that
Okay,
guy too. I
uh,
love him.
and but the thing is, his graduates are going to probably stay here and be professors and train the next generation of, if there are, if
Yeah,
there are.
if he can explain string theory to a guy like me, he could
And
definitely
yeah,
help
and
the next
those
generations.
professors are, yes, they may be sending scads of dollars back home, and their kids might go back home. The problem is their kids are going to speak with an American accent.
Right, right,
They might not necessarily be welcome, but we assimilate people very fast in this
right.
country. Okay, so but what really concerns me, and this goes back to my education, and I was in something, it was a multidisciplinary program called the College of Letters. And that was actually a substitute major, and it was patterned after Oxford tutorial program. And so it was history, philosophy, and language. You were basically major in all three of those things. And so I was required to take a semester in Europe, and so because I had a background in French, I was in Paris. But my some of my buddies were in Heidelberg, and some of them were in Barcelona. But the thing was that in this program, one of the core aspects of this program was they had a core program called the Colloquium, and that was everybody who was in the College of Letters, which was only about 30 students. Okay, so the Colloquium met twice a week. Okay, and that was a general session with everybody, and the topic might be from history, it might be from philosophy, it might be language, or a combination of all of those, but anybody gets to ask anything, and it was all about let's argue until we kind of figure out what's going on here.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, and we had some professors at the time who were very far left wing, including them. I studied with F.D. Reeve, Frank Reeve. He was Christopher Reeve's father. And all I knew is Chris Reeve was a model in New York someplace, but F.D. Reeve was the author of the Red
Superman.
Machine, Superman's father. And F.D. Reeve, Frank Reeve, turns out he was from a very wealthy American family, but he wrote a book called The Red Machines, which is all about the labor movement among the farm workers. Okay, recently disgraced Cesar Chavez and, all that whole Huerta and all that whole thing. And Frank was very much in that. But Frank, you know, learning to debate both sides without getting angry or engage. Why do lawyers call their brief an argument? It's simply and this is why, to be racist a bit, I know and stereotype, maybe more just stereotype. This is why Jewish lawyers who have studied in shul under rabbinic teachers are such good attorneys. They can argue both sides with
Yes.
equal passion, if you will. They can put their
Right.
passion in it, but they know how to put on the other hat. Now, I was president of the debate club in high school, and again, this is part of coursework and the tolerance for debate. One of the rules in debate club was that okay, we were going to debate other schools, just like, play the other football team, whatever. Okay, so, and this was in the DC area. Oh my God. Um, okay, some really edgy debate. So the topic for the semester was nuclear disarmament. Okay,
Oh,
and
that's a
so
big one.
and so, and this is in the 60s, okay? Late 60s. I'm dating myself, right? But you were the the regular work of debate club when you're meeting after school is you had to assign people to research both sides of the topic. And so
Yes.
you ended up with these file card drawers full of 3x5 cards with factoids on them that you'd
Yes.
found. Okay, but the thing was, and this was the beauty of it, was you did not learn which side you'd be debating until 5 minutes before the debate.
That's genius. That is
So here,
genius.
and that's the rule of debate club everywhere. I mean, it was not something that we'd invented. Okay,
Right, right,
so here we're up against Fairfax County Debate Club, and half those kids are like kids of senators and stuff. Okay, and very well financed high school. We were kind of a country school at the time, whatever. We didn't have a lot of kids that went to Harvard and Yale and whatever. But
right.
but here we show up, and those guys had briefcases full of file cards. We had
Just a couple of
basically,
handfuls.
well, what basically we were wearing, and mostly it was guys in our, but we had some female debaters, but the guys basically whatever would fit in the pocket of your blazer. That was our
Yeah.
that was our file cards. Okay, so one time we were debating and we had nuclear disarmament, whatever, and we were debating against. We were debating against, and these guys had they just snowed us with facts. Okay. And you got basically got two judges sitting there. They're just high school history teachers.
Right.
Okay. And so they're doing box score, like, research, logic, presentation, speaking ability. Okay. So you got this box score. And my debate partner was a guy who he was a really nice guy. He was a really bright guy. But he was the kind of guy who just crammed for the test the night before.
That's me. I'm that guy.
He was so bright, he thought he could skate his way through any multiple choice test, right? And so he had not done his homework. And so, and I was president of the club. So, I mean, I felt like I had to know, I'd read some magazine articles and whatever, foreign affairs and stuff like that, and Washington Post. But anyhow, he gets up and he starts in and he said, you know, the basic question here, let's be honest. Can we trust those Russians? And he spent his 5 minutes on talking about just the logic of going against a country that had such a rich history of chess championship, of their history in World War II, of cutting off the heads of their enemies and shipping them back in boxcars. I mean, he had enough general knowledge here, whatever. And at the end of the debate, the judges gave it to us. And then they pointed it to him and they said, You, you had such incredible logic. So he did his whole thing with very little evidence, you know. And it just kind of anchored it home. And the funny thing was the same year, go back to Jonathan Journal and history and my love of history, which I discovered more. This is only my second historical novel. I've 15 novels, but most of them are mystery thrillers and romances and that stuff. But the thing was that in my senior year, I was trying to decide, well, am I going to go to Johns Hopkins? And like, is that be more like, am I going to be a doctor or a lawyer or, but that's kind of close to home. It's like, mom's
Right.
going to mom's going to want me to come home to Baltimore. You're like, whatever. So, it's like, I want to know, I want to go to, I'll go up to New England and maybe I won't come home at Christmas. But what I was trying to decide is I was in a class with a counselor and I said, something what would really fascinate me? I had just taken, there was a course for seniors. It was like an AP course. It was called U.S. Diplomatic History.
Right.
Okay. And you begin to understand, sometimes it's not a matter of being right or wrong. It's just a matter of, what serves us best? What
Yes.
position do
Yes.
we want to take? What are we going to get out of this? And I said to the counselor, I said, what about international law? And I said, what if I, majored in that? And he said, Jerry, that was I don't call myself Jerry Jones anymore because,
Jerry
you know,
Jones. I get it.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, 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 exactly. So I don't have anything to loan, so and I think he might be on the other side of the debate. But anyhow, and I have to use all three names because there's a dozen other Gerald Jones
Right.
novelists. But okay, I said international law, and he just shakes his head. Jerry, he says, nobody makes money at that. There's nobody who practices that, and it's like fast forward to today, and the Persian Gulf and shipping companies
Right.
licensed in Liberia and international negotiations with the Chinese importer exporters. I have a feeling I could make a very nice living as an international lawyer.
Yeah,
And,
the thing about that kind of stuff today though is that somebody has to enforce international law and that becomes a problem.
well, yeah, I mean, you run to The Hague, and I mean,
Yeah.
and if you're trying to get a judgment inside the EU, it might stick.
Yeah.
you know
Yes.
and why aren't we um, why doesn't the United States part of the International Criminal Court is because when we didn't sign it when Kissinger was alive.
If the
They
reason
thought
why we're not
he would be a war
signatories to
criminal.
it, the reason why we're not signatories to it, in my theory, is because we have a habit of not following international law.
Yes, what's mine is mine and what's yours is ours.
Yes, that's right. That's right. And so
uh,
that's what leads to kind of the issue today. We have in this current conflict right now, people are saying, international law, international law. We keep hearing that. But
yeah.
the problem with it is over the last, I don't know, several decades, international law has become more of a tool to be used against um, the enforcers by the bad people, quote unquote, bad people. Because we don't know the truth of anything today. But somebody has to enforce the rules. And due to politics, it is spotty at best, spotty enforcement at best. Some people get enforcement, some people get whatever they want to do. And it's like, how do you control other major countries, major economies like China? There's like you you've got to have some kind of kinetic um, forces to enforce things. Otherwise, there's no point in it at all.
Well, there's a very good another rule of thumb, and I don't think it was the same history teacher who told me, and I'm not really sure where I picked it up, but I didn't invent it. But that is, what should be the role from our standpoint? What should be the goal of international diplomacy?
Well, I think the
What
UN
should
was supposed to be that.
what should be? But no, but as a diplomat, somebody who's sent into negotiation,
Yeah.
what should be our strategy?
Our, as in the United States,
Ours in the
or
United States, okay?
I think our
And
strategy should be look after the United States, and that diplomat should be. Um, I believe it was Winston Churchill that said, "Countries don't have permanent allies; we have permanent interests." Somebody that looks
the
after the
enemy, my
United
enemy is my
States,
friend. Yes, yes, yes.
exactly.
That's gotten into a lot of trouble. But what I would suggest is that an excellent strategy for a diplomat who has been working with the intelligence community. Okay, this is the reason the good guys who wear the nonpartisan white hats in the intelligence community, of which I believe there still are some,
Yes.
is informing the diplomats, okay, you're going up against the Russians this time over this particular piece of real estate or this resource. Let's find out what they want
Yeah.
from their side. Our intelligence suggests this is what they want. So the first thing you want to do is test and see whether we're right.
Right.
Okay,
Okay.
now, and when you find out what they want, What we have to do is when you come back and confer with us and you talk to the president, is how can we give them what we want? How can we give them what they want ahead of a war without giving away too much of what we want? How can we give them what they want?
and still get what we want.
How can we satisfy their strategic needs? So for example, now, you know, one of the on principle, I the idea of quote unquote letting Putin get away with it is, yes, it's against all international law. He was doing what Hitler did before. We fought a couple world wars over that. Um, but now with Venezuela, my dad in the oil business would have told you Venezuela, the crude oil is good for not much more than asphalt.
Well, I mean, if you look at historically, like there was precedence for what Putin did. We did it in Iraq in 2003.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And the thing is that Ukraine was very much a part of the Soviet Union. The thing is that before that, the British fought in Crimea a long time ago to try to take
Yes,
away from the indigenous Ukrainians. So no, but I mean, one way, if you really know, and maybe this is one of the reasons why we haven't heard anything about it, if you really know that Putin's bottom line might be Sevastopol, if Zelensky were willing to give him some kind of like permanent, a permanent lease wouldn't mean anything. I suppose you'd have to cede that piece of real estate, that and the Donbass and the bridge. You notice that the Ukrainians bombed the bridge between the Crimea and the
yeah,
Donbass early on. That was a very smart thing to do.
yeah. And they've done it twice since then.
Right.
So
So getting Russian goods, material, whatever, through that bridge and down to the ports of the Crimea, so that it's through the Red Sea and out through the Mediterranean and through the rest of the world, Iran, let's say, is, you know, really kind of understanding geopolitical self-interest
yes,
and thinking strategically. Why did the British want to control the port of Suez? Why did they buy Egypt's stake away from them? Why did they agree to share it with the French? They could have said, we're bailed you out. This is ours.
right.
Now they treated it like it was theirs, and they they had a major conflict in that area, in the early conflict over Palestine, and defeats in Egypt, because they kind of the Brits are kind of a case study in how to lose your empire, one fiefdom at a time,
Yep.
and you might argue we're on that road. They you saw, I don't know, did you see the movie RRR?
No, no.
Okay, it's a Bollywood produced movie about the history of the British occupation of India and what was supposed to be an indigenous uprising against the British. But I mean, and
Well,
it's
have you ever seen the similarities between the United States flag and the East India Company flag?
well, and that was a point that actually it was a former diplomat that I saw on progressive TV recently, and he was saying that the origins of the British East India Company in 1640 has a lot to do with what the oligarchs are trying to do right now.
Yep.
And he said that the British East India Company was not a British governmental initiative. They did not have enough capital to bring off, Far East trade. It was a consortium of all these big bank and big well, there weren't corporations until 1840, 200 years later, but these were the rich families, the landed gentry of
And
Britain.
corporations were always a dream for them at that time, right? And look at what we got now. We got corporations that are
Oh,
running the country.
I have a confession to make. I I have a chunk of my livelihood that I owe to Jeff Bezos and his adoption of Kindle. And I try not to give him advertising money when I can because I feel like it's just kind of throwing it down a well. But the thing is that, you know, every it is so easy to order my office supplies from there. It is so now it's so
Yes.
easy to order my food from Whole Foods. I mean, I'm not saying I do it all the time, but I have friends that won't do it on principle.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay,
As a
and
matter
the
of
thing
fact,
is that
I have accounts with all those people too. But if I can't find what I need locally, then I
you're
will
gonna get it the
branch out.
next day. I mean,
Yeah.
and then and now I'm watching. Now he owns MGM. I
Yeah.
mean, come on. Uh, the, the the old stereotype early in the days of the formation of the corporation, we're talking about pre-Civil War here, is the company store.
Yes.
I
Oh my gosh. This is
I owe my
Gerald.
soul.
I could get into this
I
all
owe
day,
my soul to
brother.
the company store. They've got me going and coming. They give me my money and then I walk to the store and I pay them for my food. Okay.
Yep.
I have no savings. I have no net worth.
That's
And
the middle class today.
well, we have our perceptions, and I will say that yes, I completely endorse a curriculum that includes a very insightful and detailed recounting of the facts of abolition, slavery, and progressive
Yes.
movements, whatever. But you have to understand, and something that I don't know that any teacher today, be they conservative or be they liberal, could actually come out and say that it wasn't so much Abraham Lincoln's generosity that freed the slaves. It was the Industrial Revolution that made slavery kind of too expensive.
Yep. Yep.
Okay,
And
and
instead they got us to do
let's connect the dot. Connect the dots with today. You're talking about the white middle class being disenfranchised. Why? What are they being disenfranchised for?
so I actually have no idea.
The
It's
takeover of AI.
That's interesting. So I think you had mentioned cryptocurrency
Yes.
about an hour ago. Cryptocurrency, I think that was an experiment to see if people will go along with it, and we did. And it's a way to control everyone.
Even the
Um,
bankers didn't want to go along with it.
Elon Musk,
Jamie Dimon and those types didn't want to go down it with. But the theory I have about that one, and I really don't know how it plays out, but again, with a dad who was an engineer in oil refineries, I kind of know some of the ins and outs of that business. And what happens, and this is something that you only read in obscure journals. You've got to kind of pick up some scholarly papers. What happens when we go green and for a fundamental and transformative and disruptive transformation of our energy infrastructure, which I wouldn't lift my hand for a minute to stop. What happens when we go off the petrodollar?
it's the company store.
No, but what happens when going? Why? And I'm going. Why? Why is the current? And and I know, the current leadership has got all kinds of selfish reasons for doing this. But what about the so-called brain trust behind them? Okay, which has to include Wall Street, the Fed. I mean, you can line up, the the movers and the shakers of the people who are supposed to be behind Rockefeller and all that other stuff over the years. Why would they want crypto? And I'm thinking that
Control. It's control.
presumably one of the reasons we didn't want Saddam Hussein in there anymore was he wanted to trade in euros.
Yes. Yeah.
And so, okay, if we want to trade in something, maybe we want to somehow control and manipulate the crypto market so we can trade. And actually, this I hadn't thought of this till now, but actually, um, the Enron scandal
Yeah.
had a lot to do with possible control of energy futures.
Yes.
And so,
Yes.
what if you were, and the idea was they wanted to be a private broker. They wanted to be kind of the substitute for a federal brokerage, a federal agency to basically buy and trade. It was going to be cap and trade.
Yeah.
Okay, so you could buy so many energy credits, and this would allow you to pollute for 2 more years before give you time to phase out. Okay, and what kind of gave them away was they got down to at the toward the end they were talking about selling bandwidth.
Yes.
Okay, okay, well if you're a big
Well,
internet
Gerald,
user,
the BMW, did you know you have to have a subscription for BMW to use your heated seats? Did you know that?
well, I know that because I used to be also in the car business um, in Detroit.
So my
And
theory is, you know what China's done with their social credit system? It,
yes,
I
you have
think
to
that's
accumulate. You have to accumulate. It's like health savings accounts.
yeah. So in that is how they will control our movements, right? And I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I just
Well,
I see
I
this happen.
mean,
I connect the dots a lot.
well,
So
parent as we said when we were hippies, paranoia is just a heightened state of awareness.
yes, yeah, exactly. Exactly. So,
Some people really
Tesla,
are out to get you, but all they want to do is drain it's that less phishing email that you got. I mean, I get half a dozen emails a day now from book publicists who claim to have read my latest book.
yes,
And sometimes it's not my book, but they claim to have read it. And what happened was their sales lead generation software that's
yes.
powered by AI has generated a review of my book, not based on
I
their
get the
having read
same
it,
thing.
not having read it, but they've scraped my Amazon description page and generated a review. And the thing that's really scary now is, okay, these could be real heads of book clubs. These could be real influencers. And it's not unusual for influencers to be asking for $50, $100 to promote
Right.
to their 100,000 fans, whatever. That's a game that's been going on for a while. But what hasn't been going on for a while is it turns out that these people are using sales lead generation software, not just for books, but for sales lead generation software, for leadership management courses, for all this other stuff.
But here's
And
the
yes,
real problem, Gerald.
some of those may be legit, but some of them may be ID thefts.
Here's the real problem
You're
with
going to
that.
send your money to a Nigerian bank account and you're not going to get anything.
Here's the real problem I see with that, Gerald, is you and I are both smart enough to see that. We see that and see this isn't quite right. There's not something quite right about this. I have a 6-year old son, Gerald, and he's not going to know the difference.
I understand. I
It's
have a
going to
friend
look
who
normal
I
to
have a
him.
dear departed friend who invested a lot of money in I think maybe it was even a print book at the time. It was an ebook that had to do with a card counting system so you could win all
Yeah.
the time at Las Vegas. And of course, it didn't tell you that if you did count cards, that's illegal.
It's
But,
actually counting cards isn't illegal. Cheating at a casino is not illegal. It's just against the rules, and they have the legal
oh, now
precedence to
see,
be able to kick you out.
well, but now see, now we've got the basis of a good argument because you obviously know the fine print.
Yes, yes.
And I just know
That's why
it's
when you
too
go to
dumb to make a
Vegas,
bet.
when you go to Vegas and you get busted cheating, what they do is they just ban you from the casino. And then if you go somewhere else and you get banned from another casino, you go on a list and you're not allowed to go to any casino in Vegas. But that doesn't stop you from going to multiple casinos and other places. And the reason why it's not illegal to cheat is because the gambling house is for sure cheating. For sure.
Well, it's in the math.
Yeah.
It's rigged in a deliberate way that has more to do with a deep understanding of probability and statistics, and even now social engineering. You see,
Exactly. Exactly.
for example, let's say you have a new membership card in the casino, and you got that membership card in return for a deep discount on the room rate at that. Okay, so you're getting a room that probably on the open market might cost $300 a night,
Yep.
100 and a half at the very most. Okay. But then, okay, I got that for $20 a night,
Yep.
and I got unlimited drinks at the bar or whatever. Okay, I got this is a great deal. The VIP card, great. Well, guess what? Behind that, in the fine print of that VIP card, just like with a lot of the apps that you download, is this gives them the rights to all the data they can suck up about you.
Yes.
So
And
we,
some of that data is even tracking your eye movements,
well,
how long
don't,
you're spending on each
and
page.
they might not even. The thing about metadata that people assume that this is gathering data that is associated with you, your social security number, your telephone number, your address. No, it doesn't have to. The fact that you're using that card to show for the drinks you happen to be ordering just as you were dealt that hand is telling them who's sitting around the table in terms of what category person you are, how likely you might be to ask for another card. And this is the whole thing behind, you remember the Cambridge Analytica scandal and
Yes.
Obama? Okay,
Yes.
the Obama campaign was using structured demographics to try to predict how people would vote.
Yes.
And Cambridge Analytica was helping them with that. The problem was that and one might argue that they were simply using statistical tools that, you know, surveyors and journalists and whatever have used for years, and just like, this is really much more sophisticated.
Yeah.
Okay,
What the
but then,
sophistication is they have it's the processing speed. They can process all this data almost instantaneously.
and again, it nobody wants to know that they're just an anonymous, you know, a nameless individual who's behaving like, half a million other people, but that is in fact, as monkey see, monkey do, what we are as a, so social engineering. And this is and so Cambridge Analytical then, I think, kind of flipped over to the other side, if you will. And that's the social engineering is the reason Brexit happened. Social engineering, and I will say the bottom line on, and I could be banned from some podcast sites for saying this. And you could say yes, our elections are still, you can't show fraud with ballots, you can't show fraud with voting machines, whatever, but you can sure as hell talk about the influence of social engineering. And I would
Absolutely.
and I would say,
That's
Ricky,
how the last
I hesitate to say this because, if we're ever up against the wall, I don't have your back either, but uh, I think it's entirely possible we lost Cold War II, and neither party wanted to tell us, going all the way back to, I don't know how far back you need to go, George Bush one, something like that. But we lost Cold War II and nobody told us.
I
Because
don't
right
think they
now,
knew. I don't think they knew,
well,
Gerald. Here's the thing, like our institutions are full of leftists and they push a so back in the day, back in the 80s, I think it was, there was a guy called Yuri Bezmenov, and he was talking about ideological subversion and how to implement ideological subversion in the United States. And, first you push it out to this people and you push it out to these people. And then before you know it, your institutions are completely full. And then those people branch out and they're teaching the younger generations coming up. and within one generation you have ideological subversion.
Well, I mean, it was the progressives and who taught me to argue either side. So, I mean,
Yeah.
I don't, as I said with the example of the Weimar Republic, the reason that the fascists came to power was the fact that the intellectuals, if you will, the intellectuals, the artists, the deep thinkers were spending so much time arguing among themselves that they could not get
Yes.
a majority together. And I think I don't know how I think this is one of the reasons that the right-wing theoreticians, if you will, the Curtis Yarvins and the Peter Thiels, I think this is one of the reasons that we tend to think because of the daily news reports that we've got brainless people in Congress and we've got brainless people, in administration and
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
wherever, and this is just basically a clown show. And it may be that political operatives and office holders are um, marionettes of demographics and cash flows and whatever. But the people behind that and the people who are really the power brokers are very, very serious people
Yes.
on both sides. Okay. And the idea that the idea that people, I mean, when you come right down to it, I mean, religion is a very effective tool of social control and has been since before the Middle Ages. I mean, certainly that was
Yeah.
the reason. That was the reason
Yes.
That was the reason the Roman Empire was afraid of it.
I've been
And
saying that for years, but however, I understand the need for it. You
yeah,
know what I mean?
exactly. It was very effective with building cathedrals and keeping towns together and marshaling armies that would protect you against the people who wanted your stuff.
Exactly.
But
Exactly.
and also, I mean, I will say, as we would say, as fellow spirit, I don't want to say spiritualists because that's the wrong vocabulary word, but as fellow um, people who might admit that perhaps God is all that there is,
Yeah.
that consciousness is simply a manifestation within a human being, and that this is essentially a wise and beautiful thing.
Yes.
And I mean, I've often said, I mean, as the author of mystery thriller series, with an agnostic minister, well, he will often tell his parishioners, he said, yes, of course there's Satan. Satan exists. But Satan is a name that the biologists give for your reptilian brain. We
Yes.
all have it. Satan exists, but
I believe in good versus evil.
you also have that other part of the brain that tells you, you know something, that's a really bad idea.
That's called a
and
conscience.
and
Oh, it's
it's
fascinating.
we get back to literature because, and this is another thing that I've talked about in some interviews, is the novelist that wrote what has been acknowledged as, and I don't know what it really is, the first psychological novel was Stendhal with The Red and the Black in 1814. And that was because Stendhal got you inside the head of not just the main character, but all of the characters, like what they were thinking, what they were plotting.
Yeah.
And so he kept alternating. And so then you get Balzac and Dickens, and they did stuff like that too. But Stendhal was famous for saying, and he says it in the book, the red and the black is, the clergy against the military as political forces in France. And that basically is, conservative versus, the religious people might be liberal, but the thing is that they were incredibly corrupt and, had boyfriends and girlfriends and, on and on and on. But then the military, also corrupt. But Stendhal said that the people of Paris, they're not any more virtuous than the people in the country. But the thing is that the people in Paris may be a bit wiser about managing things. And the reason is that they read novels. They read novels like mine, and they know the consequences of bad decisions without having to make them. So, why are so many romance novels from that era about cheating on your wife, about divorce, about not honoring your family heritage, about kicking people out of the family, about inheritance, about riches to rags, rags to riches, rags again. I mean, those are all the moral tales of that era, and the reason is not that the people in the country wouldn't necessarily have access to moral tales, but the Catholic Church at the time in France forbade people from reading the Bible.
Yeah.
You had to listen to what your priest, who was might or might not be agreeing with the priest in the next parish, okay, you had to listen to what he told you, his sermons on Sunday, and it's like, okay,
They had to get their
there
moral
are
grounding
there
from somewhere.
and yet the Jews of that era were famous for what they called pilpul. The rabbis would debate against each other all day long
Yeah.
until they could find the truth of what they thought the lesson was. And so Jews have over history been viewed as people who are reasonable, could talk it out. Sit down is like, so and the church said, well, usury lending money, so we'll let you guys do it. Well, how come, Jews have the surname gold, silver.
Right. Yes.
So,
Yes.
uh, you know, uh, uh, because that was what they were allowed to do. And
Yes.
then as a race, they found out that's portable.
Yes.
Okay, from one system. So why don't we just keep to ourselves, and then and we'll just do what they what we're their chosen people anyway. So we'll just be so you know th-
I often wonder if that's the reason why psychedelic drugs are illegal here in the United States. I wonder if, because back in the 60s, of course, they were experimenting with it and the government was doing it long before that. Um, I often, because that's where I get what started my mysticism journey, if you will, is psychedelic drugs. I was taking mushrooms and I had come to the realization, I had like an epiphany in the middle of this drug fueled,
you were
stupor,
able
I
to
guess.
make connections in your brain that
Exactly,
you
exactly. I
were
felt like
perhaps
we were
forbidden to or told not to think in that direction. I mean,
exactly.
Timothy Leary became Ram Dass and studied Eastern religions to some depth. And I don't know whether you saw the documentary that was made about him in later life. He retired to Hawaii and he had a fairly devastating stroke. And for several years, he was, I won't say forced to, the only thing that he could do was meditate.
Yeah.
Okay. And I actually wrote a book called Clifford Spiral about a stroke survivor who has the same challenges. He can remember bits and pieces of things, but he doesn't know the logic between them. He doesn't know
Right.
cause and effect. He doesn't know whether he he slugged the guy and then the guy insulted him, or the guy insulted him and he slugged the guy, because the
Right.
memories are well, and that's the whole political lie. Uh, they did it to me first, that kind of thing.
Yes.
But I'm all about famous quotes here. Ram Dass said, "I don't wish you the stroke." He said, "But I wish you the wisdom from the stroke."
Absolutely.
So that's
Absolutely.
that's pretty profound. It's like, okay, you might have, I mean, I wouldn't recommend fentanyl because it was invented as for anesthesiology,
Right. Right.
um, to bring you out of it. So
I think one of the things that uh, uh sensory deprivation, they have sensory deprivation tanks.
yes,
And
Yeah,
I think that would be wonderful, a wonderful way to meditate without psychedelic drugs, and bring you uh, to the same place, if you will.
I
I think
expect it would be scary. And I mean, I've noticed that some spas in
me
town
too,
are going to
me
have it.
too. I've not done it yet for that because I'm terrified of the inside of my brain, if that makes sense, without the
Well, of
sensory.
course, you've got all this Christian guilt and political
Exactly,
guilt and all this
exactly.
stuff. And, it was a surprise to me, again, when I was kind of making a transition from fundamentalism to whatever else I might have embraced. And I studied religious science for a while, Ernest Holmes and New Thought thinking and Elizabeth Baker Eddy and some of that stuff. And one of the things that really kind of struck me in that conversation was not only the assertion, well, maybe God is all that there is, which actually goes back to Leibniz and Swedenborg and all that other stuff. But one of the things that really struck me was it's like, well, maybe the reason for evil is people don't love themselves enough. And I thought, love themselves enough, you know, uh, for all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. I mean, yours filthy rags, and all this other stuff in the New Testament that now the Jesus seminar tells us, well, actually, the people who transcribed the New Testament might have kind of stuck that in there as a means of social control, because actually, if you thought that you were a co-creator with God, it'd be kind of hard to
Right.
get you to turn over your,
That's
shekels on
exactly what I
Sunday.
see the New Testament as is a so you got the Old Testament, which is the original social control, and then you got the New Testament, which kind of just revises things and makes it different for new people.
Well, I mean, even in the New Testament, the the um, the dates at which the Torah was set down, and then the dates at which the however many times it was translated, and then there were the various um, uh, interpretations of it that are now embodied in the Talmud. There's the Old Testament is very much a patchwork quilt, and you've got this angry, vengeful God that who I mean, here we are in the Middle East, and some of us are thinking God is on our side.
Yep. Yep.
How is that even conceivable that the creator of the universe could say, yeah, I pick winners and losers, and I've got money on the Yankees game.
Yes.
Give me and I won a Grammy. Thank you, God. I mean, yeah, I thank you, God, for giving me this talent, but
Right.
not thank you, God, for helping me win this race or or
Exactly.
or crippling my opponent, during this contest. That didn't happen. And
Right.
so the idea of social control, I mean, yeah, in the Old Testament, for example, and one of the things that I shared with a host the other day that, again, curled what was left of their hair was, do you realize that Sir Isaac Newton wrote more words about the Apocrypha and the coming of Christ than he did about physics?
No shit. I did not know that.
He was a fanatic about the book of Revelation, and he wrote an entire book, which I actually have on my shelf, on comparing the prophecies in the book of Daniel with the book of Revelation and how the book of Revelation fulfills those one by one.
No kidding. I did not
And
know
I
that.
one of the things that I say in my preacher Evan Wycliffe books, because I have him going to Harvard Divinity and deciding, I think I know too much about church history now, and then going to MIT and going astrophysics. It's kind of like funny, funny math. And so goes back and decides to be a guest preacher, and the rest is history. But the thing is that he says, you don't realize that my fiance and I. Um, on our honeymoon didn't work out because she decided she wanted to have her career in physics, and I didn't want to follow her, and so I came back here, and then she went. But we had an early honeymoon. we decided, we'd bought the tickets anyway, so we took a cruise around the Mediterranean, and one of the places we went was the island of Patmos. Okay. And one of the things you can do on the island of Patmos, which is a little tiny island, has got a mountain in the middle of it, is you can hike up a mile to the cave where supposedly St. John wrote the book of Revelation. And if you hike up there, one of the things that you will learn from an honest tour guide is, well, this might be the cave, it might not be, but it's kind of like, the places in Jerusalem and whatever. I mean, it's just, legend has it. And they even have a silver plaque there where John rested his head. Okay,
Yeah.
and it turns out he didn't write it; he dictated it to his scribe. Okay, so suppose and then if you go into Bible scholarship, you find out well, there's actually four different authors that could have written. It's probably not the same guy who wrote the Book of John. It's
Right.
a different John. And then okay, so then we go on. But the thing that really impressed me at the time was supposedly, if we assume that it was this one John, he was a Christian fleeing the emperor at the time. Was it Domitian? He was fleeing the emperor at the time, where all the emperors went back and forth between being pro-Christian, anti-Christian, killing Christians, feeding them to lions, whatever. But this was a time when it was basically to be a Christian was to be a revolutionary. And Patmos was a place where he was actually exiled. Okay, so he's here, he's up there in the cave, not only on his exile, but also because that was a place for an Antifa member at the time to hang out where the Roman guards couldn't find you or wouldn't bother looking for you because it's like he'll starve up there anyway.
Right.
So here he is being smuggled food, okay, but also possibly, the wine at the time was also spiked. The Greeks, had it in their mystery religion and whatever. It was like a lot of it
It's
was
like
like
had like ergot or something in it.
that's the rust on barley, and that was highly hallucinogenic and a part of the chemical family of LST. And yes, Retsina, the tradition of having mixing wine with herbs and whatever. Okay, and even in Greece today, or absinthe in Europe. But the thing is that he's got potentially hallucinogenic wine, especially if he has an empty stomach. Okay. But the other thing that you realize about Patmos is, yeah, it's a place where Brits go on vacations. It's a beautiful, balmy climate surrounded by turquoise sea. The thing you don't realize is that in the winter, even though this is in the balmy Mediterranean, during a sea storm, that cave is going to be friggin' cold.
Right.
Okay, so here's a guy starving, drinking hallucinogenic wine, and shivering up there, and you're telling me he's not half out of his mind?
Right.
And the thing about the book of Revelation, which makes, like I said, if let's assume that he was a very careful scholar of the book of Daniel, as he was a scholar of possibly much of, not all of the Old Testament, okay, so that he could argue it in the synagogue, whatever, just as Jesus did say. But maybe he's been okay. So if he's having nightmares, what's he dreaming about? Where are those symbols coming from? Okay,
Right.
well, those horsemen go back to the book of Daniel, go back to the lion's den, go back to the Lion of Judah, and all this is not. It's not difficult to imagine that. Okay, um, instead he was the uh, Guillermo Toro of his day,
Yeah.
and
Yes.
had just a really rich visual imagination. And it's like, okay, I'll just give you a literal example. The streets in heaven are paved with gold. Gold would be a really bad thing to pave a road with.
Right.
Okay,
Yes.
you're going to be slipping and falling and wondering, okay, maybe there's no weather up there or whatever, but but then the idea that, okay, I heard the other day and I think it's just really was really wonderful is that somebody in Africa decided, if we paved the road with silicon chips, we could make every road in this country a solar cell.
Yeah.
Okay, well, there might be rain sometimes, or whatever, and there might be mud, whatever. But net result is we have free electricity. Okay, well, what are those solar cells going to have in it? Some gold.
Right. Right.
So I mean, anyhow, it's just uh, you you really shouldn't be literal, but I mean, I really feel as though, and I got this from I really enjoyed Elaine Pagel's last book, which I believe the the Modern Miracles or Book of Miracles. She's a scholar of century um, Christian writing,
Yeah.
and she was talking about how many different flavors of Christianity there were at the time, and then all these apocryphal books of the Bible that have been discovered, Book of Enoch and the Book of Philip and the Book of Mary
The Book
and
of Enoch's very interesting. I
wow,
haven't really.
all that all that warfare stuff. Yeah, and you see, yeah. I mean, then there's all these theories about the revisionist New Testament because the Romans really wanted to depict Jews. I mean, they wanted to depict because it was the Jews that were going to rise up, and they wanted to depict Jews as kind people who turned the other cheek and all.
Yep.
So I mean, they wouldn't resist the Roman Empire. But one of the things that Elaine Pagel says, which she has a background as evangelical Christian, and she had some tragedies in her family, and then she was away from the church. And then she tried to go back, and then she had a trial. Then she lost a child, and the members of her church were saying, well, it's really good that you. I mean, it's really too bad you lost your child, but your Jewish friend who died recently, understand you're not going to be seeing him in heaven, and so this just drove her out of the church,
Yeah.
and then she really dived into the scholarship. And one of the things she says is these Christians in the early era, the term Christian didn't mean anything to them.
Yeah.
They were spiritualist Jews. Christ didn't really think of himself as a Christian. It wasn't a word yet, maybe not even until a century and a half later, or even later than that. You've got the council. We're repeating the Nicene Creed
Yeah.
in church, and that was like a century and a half later. And Emperor Constantine, who really wasn't quite sure he was a Christian, he just thought he wanted religion as a way of
Yeah.
uniting his
I
empire
mean, that's kind of
against the
like the same
Romans.
way I am now. I'm not sure. I wouldn't. I am a Christian in the traditional sense that I believe in God, I guess, but it's like I think what we were talking about, social control and a control
Yes,
mechanism. And
yes.
if you go back to World War II and current to like the UFO topic is one of my I'm a UFO freak. I love
I was a
UFOs. I
guest
love
on Mysterious Radio. We'll talk about that in another show.
absolutely. I'm a UFO fan. I love the topic. I love the all of it. But if you look back in history during World War II, they talked about UFOs. The government did. And currently, right now, they're talking about
The
UFOs.
founder of Raytheon, um, Vandenberg,
Yeah. Yeah.
was uh, a renowned physicist, and also was really, I mean, along with some people that he knew, Simon Ramon, the rocket scientist, and L. Ron Hubbard, and all that stuff. They were all having dialogues about, well, is angel just another word for,
Yes.
alien being, whatever.
Yes.
And
That's
and
where I was going with that.
and one of the things that I find fascinating is, even our dear friend Elon Musk, who's talking about
I don't see aliens.
he's gutting the government, but then he turns around and has these debates about his brother with his brother about how we don't live in base reality. Statistically speaking, it's very likely we're living in the simulation of some other civilization.
God.
And one of the reasons that there you go. And the thing is, if that were the case, even if you go to the ufologist idea of like, oh yes, there's a God for every black hole at the center of every galaxy. Okay, I'm not going to tell you no, but I mean,
Maybe.
that would be a pretty powerful God, God
Right,
if
right.
if he's just the Milky Way God. But what I'm saying is, if that were true, if we were living in some kind of simulation, then it would make a lot of stuff make sense.
Yes.
The dual slit experiment in physics,
Oh
which
my, that's
they're
one of my,
actually
that's wild.
they're actually using to try to find out if we are in a simulation. They're the serious physicists. But the other thing is, when my aunt died, the preacher said, well, she's with Bill in heaven now. And I go, well,
Where
she
is heaven?
she had a personality, and that personality existed within a human body, and that human body had
Yes.
brain chemistry and a personality that came from asking itself every day, who am I? Who am I? Who am I? Who am I?
Yes.
And so you could kind of call that a soul, at least the Buddhists would. But the idea if she has had a soul and it's an eternal soul, then that probably isn't just who she was then.
Right.
Her tipping. So it's very hard for me to see that we're just going to all have family get-togethers
Right.
for eternity. It's like, I'm not, I mean, I don't think I could even stand for a family Christmas lasting for more than a week. Okay.
Yeah, that's when I
So,
tell people, or when I ask people, like, where is heaven's geographical location?
no, I don't
Right?
think you're going to
Where
get there.
where is heaven? And that's what, like,
Right,
so
right, right.
when we speak about God and spirituality, I have somewhat of a theory, and I don't know like how much of a theory it is, and it may not be the first time anybody's ever thought about it. But what if consciousness is God?
Well, and I would submit that's as close to what some of the neuroscientists are saying, because you've got the people on the side of Ray Kurzweil, keyboard and artificial intelligence and
Right.
all this stuff, MIT. And Kurzweil is just basically saying it's inevitable. The minute we build a machine that's complex enough, it'll have consciousness. And then you've got people like Christoph Koch, who is a neuroscientist who is arguing from the side of quantum theory and all this other stuff and saying, guess what? We can't really find a mechanism for consciousness.
Right.
We've tried and tried and tried. Now, there may be stuff that exists at the quantum level that we don't understand, that we don't have any way to measure. I mean, spooky X, quantum
Spooky action at
entanglement.
a distance.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. I mean, and they're saying, oh no, it's impossible to use that for communication. Well, guess what? If it could be used for communication, the idea of communicating with somebody who's like 19 billion light years away is instantaneous.
Yes, the double
Okay.
slit experiment is actually proof of that.
But the question is, how do you can't manipulate it, because
Right.
it's
Right.
it was those particles were separated 19 billion years ago. So I mean, you can,
But the
but
theory
what
is
about
like if consciousness is what um the observer is in that experiment, I believe consciousness is the observer.
and you basically are just like a broadcast television receiver,
Exactly.
and consciousness is there all the time. And actually, it was in Koch's book, The Feeling of Life Itself. And most of his book is about physics, but it's just in the last chapter is he says the only thing I can really posit is if we, whether it happens to be physical or physical in a way that we don't explain, we don't define physics right now, But if consciousness is what there is, then I would submit that all beings, I don't know if I'll go as far as plants, but all beings experience consciousness to the extent that their receiver can experience it.
Yes,
So a
yes,
dog is probably a very bright 3-year-old, uh, you know, um, but a spider might be able to perceive that he's in light or darkness, and but
right,
he's got all these robotic behaviors that just basically come with the don't necessarily come with consciousness. He's not making a decision to run away from your hand as he's trying to swat you, but he says, okay, my ancestors, if they stuck around in the light, they got swatted. If they went to the dark, they missed it. So, okay,
collective consciousness,
they've got a million years of evolution programmed in their bodies. That doesn't mean they're thinking in the way
right,
that you and I would say is thinking. But then again, that propensity for life, that
yeah,
idea that molecules and particles and the stuff of the universe that was there in the Big Bang, the idea that somehow in that is an inevitability toward the organization that is life. That you couldn't turn off life if you tried.
right,
If you could blow up, Star Wars, you could blow up their planet and our planet and the other planet, but guess what? DNI can survive in an asteroid, and it's
yep,
just going to show up someplace else.
that's
And
exactly
so
right,
the idea that our relatives as aliens might not look that different from us. When you realize that now you'd have to respect the fact that an octopus is a relative because that
right.
they've got the same DNA that we do, right? I mean, they're very different for reasons I don't quite know. But I mean, the mammals, my God, we're just
Well,
carbon copies of each other.
their environment's different,
Well, indeed, yeah. And an alien that had lived in the seas of what is it? The moons of Jupiter. Uh,
oh, yeah, I'm having a blank here too. Let
yeah,
me
there
look
was
that up.
I think there was a science fiction novel um, about an expedition there, but they basically did uh, sub-freezing deep sea diving because wasn't just
Europa.
Europa, and it wasn't just water. It was some kind of super super liquid sub-freezing substance that basically beings could evolve in. And I don't know whether they were methane
Primordial soup.
based or whatever.
Primordial soup.
There you go. That's it. That's it. So give me a bowl.
Yeah,
So
num num
yeah.
num num. Yeah, that's yes. Well, I tell you what, Gerald, this conversation has been fascinating and it's been all over the place. These are the type of conversations that I absolutely love,
I've been
man.
accused of that before, and I say, listen, I try to come back to the point, is all I can say.
Well, I think that is the point, Gerald. Like
Indeed.
I really do. I think the progression of knowledge is such that if we don't have conversations like this, we're all going to be end up stupid, you know?
Well, this is something also that has a really practical application for your members of your audience who are writers. And I've spent a long time doing this, and I people ask me, "Well, how do you know this? How do you know that?" I said, "The only reason I know anything, because you seem to think I know a lot about this, is I've made a mistake and I recovered from it. And
Yes,
it
yes,
might have taken me because if I read it, you can download, a book by an expert who tells you, how to write a book or how to do anything, how to be a leader, how to speak in front of groups, whatever. If you read it in a book, the problem is if that expert only learned it from an expert from another book,
yes.
it may not have any practical value. It may
Amen.
not
Amen.
actually work. And so the reason I have designed my websites and I maintain my websites, no, they're not the most elegantly designed websites. I think they're not
Well,
bad, but they're a little out of date. But the thing is, I beat my head up against the wall with WordPress. I beat my head against the wall with Vegas video, video editing.
I've
And
only got
so
half my website built for the same reasons, man. I'm paying $400 a year for I
right.
don't even know what I'm doing here.
So here's my lesson about the authors, though, because most of I mean, my part of my day job is, helping people across the finish line for usually their first book. And the first thing I say is, please never begin a sentence with my book, because if you get through this one, I strongly suspect you're going to write another one, and
Right.
you're going to have the chops to write another one, and maybe you're going to lose some of your fear about writing another one. But one of the things I will say is that, and this is an author just said this to me about a month ago. He said, Gerald, he says, can I give you some coaching? Can you use some coaching? I said, yeah, sure. And he said, yeah, we can argue either side, right? And he said, you do digress a lot. And I said, okay, think about it this way. And I hadn't thought about it this way until I answered him. I said, think about it this way. Isn't that what you're paying me for? What is thinking outside? If in banding this stuff about, we somehow come across something that neither of us thought of before,
Right.
uh, ideas aren't copyrightable. Is You don't need my permission to use it. And how is your book going to? Oh, the very first thing I learned as a film writer, that was my first job. I actually wrote industrial films, and I don't know who told it to me. Another saying: "Give me a new idea that stood the test of time, kid." Okay, so give me great expectations, but put it in a modern setting and give it a spin that I haven't, so I don't recognize that I'm hearing the same story that I love again.
Right.
Okay. And um, if you read, now I'm blanking on
So what
Amortal's
I
first,
tell people,
Rules of Civility. If you read
okay,
Amortal's Rules of Civility, and he tells you a few times in that book how much Great Expectations was a favorite of the narrator. Okay. He's he took the plot of Great Expectations and aspiring to more, wanting more than you need,
right,
the power of greed, the power of and the desire to move up in society, the desire for a pauper to be a gentleman, all this other. Okay, and he sets it in New York society in 1938, and he really knows New York. And he really knows New York aristo blue blood society. This is in the Depression, and yet these people are like, let them eat cake. I mean,
right.
okay. So it's not that there's anything new, but this, and I've said this I actually said this to a course that I gave to writers, and I said, okay, which of you who have you read Moby Dick in high school? Okay, and just about everybody. Okay, or okay, how many read it other time? Okay, all right, how many know the book? Okay, and can you give me the plot of Moby Dick? And one of them, well, wasn't it something about a white whale? Okay, yeah. And then another one that was a little bit sharper. He said, well, this captain, he was really lusting after that white whale. I said, I'm not sure that it turned out too well. Okay, okay. I submit to you that the psychiatrist Milton Erickson, who's not with us anymore, but he was known as the great storyteller of psychiatry, one of his core beliefs was that a story that you've forgotten is going to have more influence on your behavior than something that you
No
learned
kidding.
last week. And he said the reason is that a forgotten story is only forgotten by your logical conscious mind.
Okay.
Your subconscious mind cannot be censored. Your
Right.
subconscious mind is like a junk collector. Like,
Right.
when can I use this? When can I use that? Okay. So what will happen is the story of Moby Dick, going back to Stendhal, the moral lesson, the thing the thing that we were being told as an agenda behind the story, no, and the Samuel Goldwyn, if you want to send a message, use Western Union. No, no, no. Every storyteller has always been trying to teach a lesson around the fire. Okay,
Yeah.
it's all about moral lessons. Okay, so the moral lesson in Moby Dick is there, and it is affecting the decisions that you make on a daily basis. And guess what?
Absolutely.
That's called the Western tradition in literature. And
Interesting.
if you were raised in China, or if you were raised, being taught, you know, tribal stories in indigenous East Africa, whatever, your worldview, your your perception behind cause and effect, or crime and punishment, or whether we live in the souls of trees or or in monkeys or whatever, all this may be different. And the magical thing about what you were talking about, Ricky, is uh, in the there was a series of lectures. It was a couple that claimed they had channeled. Um, it was in the Hay series. There was Esther Hicks,
Okay.
Esther and Jerry Hicks. Okay, and again, New Age. They go around to make money lecturing and whatever. But and they had a whole bunch of audiobooks, and Hay House published them. But and I heard Esther speak a couple of times, and actually Esther and Jerry speak. I heard them both speak, but and then Jerry passed away. Okay. And they were both claimed to channel the spirit. Okay. And Jerry kind of wrote it down. And, Esther is like part of channeling it, whatever. Abraham was the spirit. And the time that I heard Esther speak after Jerry had passed was that, yeah, Abraham, and so she was talking mostly about the wisdom of Abraham, which wasn't terribly different from Old Testament wisdom. Okay, fine. But the thing that she said that really struck me was, Jerry's with me all the time now. And and she says, and the only way I can figure it out is Jerry just stepped out of the movie.
Yeah.
And that was so Matrix life because Matrix was just like a thing right then.
Yeah.
And there wasn't this debate about metaverses and alternate reality. And then now what do we have? Everything Everywhere All at Once is a movie, a popular movie that is
Yeah.
basically deriving its plot from speculation of quantum physics about the metaverse.
That's
Now
very
that's a
interesting.
how do you make a movie audience receptive to the idea that there may be multiple forms of existence? And I had one guy, actually he was a chiropractor who had studied a lot of esoteric stuff. And he had a special session that for an extra amount of money you could contract him for a 2 hour special session where he would sit down with you in a dimly lighted room, and he called it the spirit walk. And it was part hypnotherapy, it was part, psychoanalysis, part just,
Right.
me to you, sharing like you and me. And he would claim that he's going to draw surprising things out of you. And it's like, well, if you have another name, what would it be? And uh, so we talked about that, and he says, "Oh, well, do you realize that name means this?" And so we're going back and forth on that. And I'd had a regression hypnosis in prior years, and I actually wrote about it in one of my books, a fictional episode of being a British Army officer in in the Khyber Pass and in the 19th century. And it's like it was very vivid. And of course, I ended up writing about that and some other things. But he said but I said, but the problem was I wrote this historical novel about this painter in the Victorian era, same period, 1890s. And then I went back, I'd finished writing the novel. I found out we got the same birthday. And he said, you realize you can be living five lives at the same time.
Yeah, yeah,
And I said, well, how do you know that? And he says, I know it. So I mean, he probably read it somewhere, but I don't know. But again, it was this idea of the metaverse that was somehow being anchored in him that, there's St. Paul.
yeah,
I see through a glass, but darkly, then face to face. Well, am I going to be facing a human being created me in his image? Okay, yeah, okay, well, yeah, you're going to live for a long time, God. You probably got some exceptional biology. Uh, I just, you know, we it's not that when you were talking about the essence of Christianity, it's like, and Elaine Pagels was talking about that. She said in the early years of Christianity, right after the crucifixion, whether you think that he survived it or not, whether you, but there were dozens of different sects that you would
yeah.
call Christian, but they thought of themselves as spiritualist Jews, and especially
I think they called it like Jewish mysticism.
Jewish mystics, uh, but the idea of the Kabbalah, the idea of esoteric knowledge that is not necessarily for the everyday person.
Yeah,
Okay. It wasn't that they were elitists or snobs, just that, if you want to devote yourself to meditation, if you want to divert yourself to unconditional love, if you want to devote yourself to fasting or whatever the practices were, then you may discover an aspect of human existence that is very rewarding.
yes,
And she was saying, okay, the idea of modeling Christ is really the essence of Christianity.
yeah,
Okay. And it's not a matter of preaching. It's not a matter of go out and preach the gospel and, drag them kicking and screaming into the church until they, okay, and until they agree to be baptized, whatever it happens to be, sell them, sell them, sell them, sell them. Billy Graham, sell them, sell them, sell them.
yep.
Okay. But model, and then the idea that people say, how do you know this? Uh, and I went through this one exercise once where they said, ask your acquaintances what their impressions are of you and tell them you really want them to be as honest as possible. And I thought, and again, I'm telling stories on myself, and I mean, you can say what you want about me, but I mean, I assumed that as a author, as somebody who has to do a lot of self-promotion, whatever, they were just going to say, listen, Gerald, you're just a bloody egotist.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Well, what'd they say?
I didn't compare notes with any of them. I just asked them the 20 questions. The word that I got was generosity.
That's awesome.
And I thought to myself, listen, and I will tell this story on myself also is that for quite a number of years, the best way I could support myself and pay the rent was not only writing business and technical nonfiction, but writing proposals for government contracts.
Yeah,
And a lot of those were for healthcare, a lot of those were for social programs, but a lot of those were for weapon systems.
defense. Yeah,
Okay. And but the same folks put the James Webb Telescope in outer space, and that stands right up there
absolutely.
with Galileo. So I mean, okay, I mean, so I wasn't clear to know a lot of the stuff that, so whatever. But the thing that really got anchored for me since COVID was um, not only because of COVID, but also because of our dear friend Elon. Um, the government contracting just froze over.
Yeah.
All that work, just like, okay, now, and a lot of the government contracting now is being just simply what they'll just renew legacy contracts. Like they'll
Yeah.
kick the can down the road for 5 years. That's a big problem because if it's for old technology, they're just making the technology that much older. Okay.
Right. And I think that's what just happened. A good example of that would be Lockheed Martin and Boeing with the F-35 and F-47.
Oh, don't get me started about those. Um, there's a reason why the F-16 was pretty effective, but
I love
um,
the F-16. I've not seen a plane that was like and the F-14. I take that back. The F-14 is pretty neat as well.
well, you gotta be a guy brave enough to fly by the seat of the pants. So
Absolutely.
they don't make those
Strap
guys
me in that
anymore
rocket, baby.
because their background is flying robotic passenger jets. So, but no, but
Right.
what I'm getting to, I mean, and again, I went off the track, but I'm getting right down to what I want to say about my newer practice building coaching and I don't like the word coaching, but guiding or mentoring, advising new authors is an exercise in trying to be as generous with what I know about whatever it happens to be. And some of these subjects are there's no such thing in writing as competitive. Okay, because a publicist once told me, and he was a publicist for a major publisher, and he said, imagine that you're going to buy your book for Ricky for his birthday. Okay. Now you don't know Ricky very well, but you kind of hope that he'll like your book. So you walk into Barnes and Noble and you go to the bookshelf now, and you have to know what category that is. You go to the bookshelf where you expect your book to be, and it's alphabetized or whatever. You go to where exactly where your book would be, and your book is not there. Okay, the party's that night. So you've got to buy one of the books that's on either side of your book on that bookshelf. He says, "What book do you buy him?" And they said, "This is why we watch physical bookstore sales much more closely than Amazon sales, because a, a bookstore purchase is much, much more likely to be an impulse buy. And part of it is it's an impulse buy not only on content, but on the cover design, on the
Yeah.
way it looks, on the way, like, do you like thin books? Or do you like thick books? Okay, this all goes into our marketing strategy.
Yeah.
Like, I love thick romance novels. Maybe you don't. Maybe you want a book you can read on your coffee break. I will say in the world of ebooks now, nobody knows how long a book is. They like the ones they can read at the bus stop. We're waiting for the food to come. Shorter chapters. But now with cable series, they want a 13 episode romance novel where it can be one minor character for every episode and subplot. I
Yeah.
think
My
that's wonderful.
attention span is so bad that I know how long it takes me to read or listen to 250 pages. I know it takes me about 12 hours.
Well, you're doing pretty good now, brother.
Um, so you know what, Gerald? I think this would be a great spot to stop. Um, and so we're coming up on 2.5 hours here. Um, this has been a fantastic conversation, and I can't I actually can't begin to even thank you enough for coming and hanging out with me. And that's where that generosity comes from, is because you're so generous with your time,
I
number
enjoy it
one.
so thoroughly. I mean, I mean, get me started, and I love it. Of course, storytelling builds community, and I mean, really,
Absolutely.
I mean,
Absolutely.
you and I politically, I don't know whether we're on the same page. This is such a stereotypical expression, but but the idea is we can share what inspires us
Yeah,
without getting
exactly.
on into, I mean, if I see you on the street
I call it common ground.
indeed, and it's like, you just look up at me and say, and you just give me that look, I go, you know, I expect that he's walking away now. And I just think that I think that's the essence of it.
Right.
I value it so much when, I mean, I'm not the kind of a person to say hi and engage you in a conversation in an elevator.
Really?
Okay. Yes, because I feel as though you have your privacy, your space, and it's like we're in a small space, and it's like, if somebody starts talking to me between floors, it's like, what are they trying to sell me? Okay.
Yes, yes. But I'll tell
Okay.
you the reason why I do that is I'm a 6 foot tall, 300 pound guy, right? And so I'm kind of intimidating and I have an imposing presence, but I'm a really nice guy and I love being happy. So I think that I do some small talk. Like I'm the guy that will talk to you in the elevator.
Oh, see, I
Um,
was always first row in the school photo. I was
yeah, I'm that
all
guy
of
because I
5'6" in my, high heels.
it makes me uncomfortable, right?
Hmm.
But I like making other people comfortable. And I've just
You sure we
recently
haven't
been
met each other in an elevator before?
maybe
It's gonna
I've been
happen.
recently diagnosed with autism. So a lot of things
Oh,
over my life now make sense. And I always found it uncomfortable to speak up. I always found small talk uncomfortable. But when I go out to the grocery store or when I go to the gas station or when I run into people on the street, I see someone and I just smile. Whether I'm feeling terrible or not, I smile. And that
you may
smile is
have some,
contagious.
you may have some intuition that being on the spectrum, as it were, whatever,
Yeah, I think I do.
confers on you. Because I've known, I had a son who was schizophrenic who that did not work out very well. But I also have a woman that we've done two books now, and the first of her book was "The Light in His Soul: Lessons from My Brother's Schizophrenia," and
Ah,
she believed that he was a seer, and she would often go to him for advice. And now that he's gone, and he did not die from his mental illness, he died from, he was a chain smoker because he was homeless for years and years. And she says, every time I see a hummingbird, I believe it's a visitation from him. And she
so
says,
sweet.
and I mean, and I mean, she's into shamanism. I mean, this is not somebody that I wrote a book with her, but I can't say I'm going to get up and give a seminar on shamanism
Yeah.
or preach to you to be a Southern Baptist or anything else. But I believe firmly in that the one verse that I don't think I ever read in the Bible, but I read it in a book called the Aquarian's Gospel of Jesus the Christ that I think somebody said that they channeled, and it's not unbiblical,
Yeah.
but Jesus said, "What I am, you will be." Now that's the second coming of Christ.
Yes.
That's you have a world where more people think that and act that way. That is a world that I don't care whether it lasts,
Amen. Amen.
we want to step out of the movie and go to another one. I mean, maybe one of the reasons you step out of the movie is to go someplace else where most of the people don't think that way. I,
That's right. Well,
so
Gerald, again, again, this has been fantastic. But where can people find you? I know you have a Substack as well, right? And
yes,
that's
that
called Thinking
subset
About Thinking.
thinking about thanking, and that's the kind of stuff that we do here. But also reviewing the books of other authors that I respect, and so often, in the club, if as it were, and not necessarily. new stuff, old stuff, not necessarily something came out last week, but also not with an agenda necessarily. It's just what did I find value in the book? I mean, a good example is I'd love to do a review of um, Rules of Civility because I think that I took a lot away from that book and I hadn't read any of his stuff before. So yeah, and GeraldEverettJones.com, spelled just the way you see here. And that's got links to my books, but also the review copies. If you want to, little sweetener for going there, you get a review copy, and you can read about the Pre-Trib and Wycliffe series. So, and yes, I also give you permission. Carve this up, multiple episodes. Let them binge watch if they can stand it.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I'm actually going to I'll probably reach out to you again, and we'll do this again and
Well,
and
feel
talk
free to
about
cut
other.
the parts that'll get us in trouble. Okay.
Absolutely. I
Unless that's the
message to
goal.
the editor.
Unless you want to get in trouble,
I actually
perfectly
I'm a
fine.
free speech absolutist, so I believe even if it pisses people off, it deserves to be out there. I don't care. So
Sam
I'm
Goldwyn, good publicity. Don't worry until it's time to worry. I mean, then.
absolutely, absolutely. Well, Gerald Everett Jones. Again, you guys can find Gerald's books and Gerald's blog and at GeraldEverettJones.com. He's also on Substack, Thinking About Thinking. Now, Gerald, like I said, this has been awesome, and I appreciate you hanging out with us. If you could hang out with me for just a moment, and we'll let all these guys
Poor
go, and
folks.
we'll see
They're
you
not
on the
going to
other
hear the
side.
secrets.
That's right. That's right. Hey, everybody, tune in again next week. Gerald Everett Jones, author. Thank you very much, man. We'll see you guys later. Bye.
Thank you.